Hello, everybody. It's Richard Clark. Quiet Friday morning here in Abbotsford, where I live, and I thought I'd try and get another video done today. This is where the videos shift their focus. I want to go into a very sort of detailed analysis of what an addiction is, what it's defined as, and what recovery would look like as you sort of transform the addict from being an acting out addict in self destructive behavior to being a spiritual person, and the reasons that spiritual principles, if you understand the psychology behind spiritual principles, if you understand that psychology, you'll understand why being a spiritual person is a sort of a direct antidote to being an acting out addict. And one of the things in this lecture series or seminar video series is that I want to try and explain to people so that they can understand that it is not necessary to believe in God or a higher power in order to be a spiritual person. Many times over the years and decades that I've been a therapist or helped people recover from addictions and the seminars I've done in several different countries, many's the time I have heard someone say that if you wish to be a spiritual person, you have to believe in God or a higher power. And this is an aspect of religious righteousness, and it is not true. So, anyway, these next 3 or 4 videos, hopefully 3 videos, will be about explaining the nuances of addiction from a psychological point of view so you can understand them. And this is particularly important because the last census in Canada tells us that about 30 or 35% of the people in Canada and about 30%, 27, 28, 29% of the people in the United States are declared atheists or agnostics. And they usually declare this in secret or they're quiet about it. And the reason they're quiet about it is because they're trying to avoid persecution by sort of the religious moral majority that are Christian in this culture. But according to verifiable statistics, something around 30% of the population in North America are atheists or agnostics, and that is rapidly increasing. So it's important to understand that when you're an addict and you're approaching recovery or you're trying to help them, the name of the game or the overall goal is to understand what spiritual principles are and to achieve these in your life. And I'll be explaining that in some detail. Anyway, so this leads me to explain that what I'm trying to get you to do is to understand over the next few lectures that we all need to start on the same page. I'm going to give you a definition of addiction that seems to fit best with the calamity and the crisis that we're up against in North America. I want to give you some information on the 2 major classifications of addiction. And that's not alcohol and drugs. It's a completely different way of looking at it. I'll be explaining those to you. What the transition process is, what spiritual principles are, and how you can achieve these in your life. And I'm also probably going to spend an inordinate amount of time talking about this thing that's common in sort of 12-step recovery programs of rigorous honesty. That's one of the fundamental requirements of addiction recovery, but with addicts it's very hard to achieve, which I'll be getting into. So anyway, the definition of addiction that seems to be most serviceable or applicable over the decades that I've been involved in addiction recovery is this one. And it's from the World Health Organization. An addiction is a pathological relationship with a mood-altering experience that has life-damaging consequences. And that's from the World Health Organization, and it's the definition that they used prior to 1990 or 1995. Now, I put 1995-ish because I'm not exactly sure of when they changed the definition, but prior to, say, 1990, that was the definition they used. And then after 1995 or 1990, the World Health Organization changed their definition as a result of influence from various medical associations, the American Medical Association, Canadian. They had to sort of expand the definition and make it a lot more complicated. And that may be medically accurate. I'm certainly not criticizing any medical associations or the World Health Organization for changing the definition. But by making the definition more complicated, it makes it less available to addicts or alcoholics or therapists or counselors who are trying to get out of an addicted mindset. I want to spend some time talking about the difference between disease and illness, as I did in the earlier lectures. So anyway, that definition, addiction is a pathological relationship with a mood-altering experience that has life-damaging consequences, is the best definition that I've ever found that is most serviceable in helping people to exit themselves from a self-destructive addicted lifestyle. Now, in order to make sure everybody's on the same page, I'm going to spend a few minutes explaining that definition. And there's three main parts to it. The first part is an addiction is a pathological relationship, and pathology is the study of disease. A doctor who is a pathologist is a person who studies and researches diseases or illnesses. And so, an addiction is a diseased relationship between a specific type of self-destructive behavior and the person who carries it. It's a pathological means that the person who has an addiction can't say no to it on their own. If you think of it in terms of, say, schizophrenia or paranoia or diabetes or cancer, a person goes into a doctor's office and the doctor says, "You have diabetes." The person, the patient, cannot just think in their mind. They cannot just think, "I don't want to have diabetes. I'm going to say no to diabetes." Can't do that. Or the person who has schizophrenia or paranoia. They walk into a psychiatrist's office and the psychiatrist says, "You have paranoia," or "You are paranoid," or, the patient or the person who has the condition cannot just simply say, "Well, I don't want to be schizophrenic, so I'm going to say no to it." It's a pathology. It's an illness. And that means that in the first place, you cannot say no to it. In the second place, you're probably going to need some outside expert help in order to leave the condition, to heal from it. So an addiction is a pathological relationship wherein the person who is an addict can't just kind of think to themselves, "Well, I guess I'm an addict. I guess I'm gambling too much and I'm an addict, or I guess I'm spending or shopping too much, or I'm addicted to pornography or alcohol. And I don't want that, so I'm just going to say no." It's not that simple. It's a disease. I don't think it's a disease, it's a mental illness, but I'll be getting into that. So, the first part of the definition is it's a pathological relationship. The second part of the definition is it's with a mood-altering experience. That is critical because in the process, in the cycle of addiction, in the cycle of acting out, the purpose of acting out is to embrace or participate in a mood-altering experience. Now, the problem with that is the mood-altering experience or the behavior that you're participating in can be very wide-ranging and very subtle. So, a mood-altering experience might be getting angry and self-righteous. And so, the addict themselves is feeling out of sorts, they're feeling dislocated. I'll be talking about dislocated quite a bit. But the addict themselves will be dislocated, they'll be feeling out of sorts, and one of the fastest ways to change your mood is to get self-righteous and indignant and angry. And you don't necessarily have to display that. You can think it in your mind. So the addict can be driving down the road, they can be feeling like they're in a bad mood or sad or lonely, and all of a sudden they see somebody else breaking a traffic law and they become self righteous and indignant. Very often, people who are involved in road rage are addicts. With food, food is a complicated one. Some people have what they call childhood onset food issues, and that's like anorexia and bulimia in people who are sort of under puberty or less than 15 or 16 or 17 years old. When you have food issues that are childhood onset, that's a specific type of sort of psychiatric concern that has to be dealt with in a certain way. But when the food issues are in already, people who are already adults, when food issues develop at 25 or 30 or 35, when food issues develop when, like, an alcoholic quits drinking and all of a sudden they're eating chocolate cake 3 times a week, or they're quitting alcohol and drugs, or they quit gambling and all of a sudden they're binging on food. Those later onset food issues, or when food issues develop subsequent to an adult addiction, those food issues are addicted in their nature, and they have to be dealt with in a different way than childhood onset. And there was a lot of confusion about this back in the 1970s and 80s when sort of anorexia and bulimia and food issues in children were becoming prominent in social consciousness. There's a lot of people in North America who are what are commonly called relationship addicts. Now, back in the 1970s and 80s, we used to call this codependence when John Bradshaw, Melody Beattie, Harville Hendricks, and many other people were understanding what we called codependence. Charles Whitfield, when he was writing his books about codependence, they were calling it codependence, but they were addressing it as if it was an addiction. And you'll get more clarity in understanding any sort of dysfunction and issue and conflict you have in relationships if you talk about them as a relationship addiction. There's lots of addiction in people who are overtly or obviously religious. The concern with religious addiction is becoming self-righteous. And it's a common problem that people will use religion as a concealment strategy for addiction to self-righteousness. And then they binge on moral superiority, and they like to criticize and punish people who don't have the same moral standards that they do. There's one of the common ways that people act out in relationship addiction is by participating in dating sites. Dating sites are a way of achieving a mood altering experience. Anger, binging on food, relationship conflict, and certainly dating sites are a way to mood alter, which is the second part of the definition, a mood altering experience. And what happens on dating sites is people will fill out a profile. They'll describe themselves well, 5 foot this, and they'll put their height and their weight and their hair color and what they like and what they don't like. But the other part, in the hunting aspect of relationships, is they'll describe exactly what they want their prospective partner to be. You have to be this tall, and please weigh this much, and don't be this and don't be that, and make sure that you have this kind of a job, and you're physically fit, or you work out, or you don't work out, or you have a good education. They have this kind of shopping list for the kind of person that they want to date. And it's like going grocery shopping. You go into the grocery store, you take out your list, and you look at the 16 or 17 things you've got on your grocery list, and you walk around the store and you pick them all up, and you check them all off, and then you go home. And you feel satisfied that you bought everything on your list. And it's the same thing with dating sites. You want a person who is this tall and weighs this much, and you have this whole list of qualifications and attributes. And then you go out on your first date, and within 45 minutes, you're disappointed that this person you met online didn't measure up. Or after 2 or 3 dates, you realize you're quite dissatisfied and that other person was dishonest. Then you start to feel despair and sadness or anger. And then you start to mood alter by going hunting again. Gambling is a mood altering experience. Sex is a mood altering experience. Sexual addiction can be expressed by dating sites. It can be expressed in using pornography. It can be expressed in people who spend hundreds of dollars every week going out to singles bars, hunting up relationships so they can have sex with strangers. Drugs and alcohol are mood altering experiences. Spending tens of thousands of dollars on cosmetic surgery is a mood altering experience. Exercise is a mood altering experience. So, the first part of the definition is it's pathological. You can't say no. The second part of the addiction definition is that it is a mood altering experience. And the third part of the definition is there has to be life damaging consequences. The life damaging consequences are far ranging, and usually when we talk about life damaging consequences, people will think about alcoholics or drug addicts. And they'll think, well, that person is in trouble. That alcoholic is in trouble because they've got another impaired driving charge or they're going to jail again. That drug addict is obviously a drug addict because they're in the hospital again or because they've got HIV. So with alcohol and drugs, the life-damaging consequences are usually blatantly obvious. But there's a whole other list of life-damaging consequences that I put in the green and the blue book that you can read. Life-damaging consequences might be 1 or 2 divorces. Life-damaging consequences might be never holding a job longer than 6 months, never being in a relationship longer than 2 or 3 months, having to move apartments. Life-damaging consequences might be in constant conflict with everybody in your family. Life-damaging consequences might be abandoning your children and your family through work addiction. Life-damaging consequences are sort of wide-ranging. And when you look at life-damaging consequences with an open mind, what you'll find is that there's a whole lot of people in this culture of North America that are actually addicts, but they don't want to call themselves addicts because there's this sort of demeaning, punishing moral superiority that the mild and moderate addicts like to have when they're talking about alcoholics and drug addicts. Alcoholics and drug addicts are those bad people over there. But just because I have a spending addiction or a shopping addiction or I've declared bankruptcy twice or because I've got a couple of divorces, well, that just means I made a few bad choices. That doesn't mean I'm an addict. But in fact, they are. And I explain that in some detail in the Blue Book. So the thing to remember is that if you're going to make much sense out of everything I'm going to be talking about in the next few seminars or few videos, you should get that definition of addiction in your memory. It's a pathological relationship with a mood-altering experience that has life-damaging consequences. And that will help you make sense out of the mess that most people are in. So in the next, that brings us to the end of this video. Mostly I was interested in explaining the definition in some detail so that you could understand that that's where we all have to start from. The other thing I'll add in closing is that one of the myths that we live with is that people only have one addiction. You know, if you're an alcoholic and you quit drinking and, then you're going to be okay. Or if you're a gambling addict and you quit gambling. This could not be farther from the truth. If you're an addict, you always live with 2 or 3 addictions operating at the same time. And I have, over the years, come to call this polyaddiction. If you're an alcoholic, or a drug addict and you quit acting out with your drugs or alcohol, you'll notice that your smoking will increase, or you'll start eating more sugar, or you'll start watching more pornography. If you're a porn addict and you quit using pornography, might find out that you're gambling. If you're a gambling addict and you quit gambling, you might find out that you're drinking more. Poly addictions are a given. And what's more important than that is that one of the addictions in your sort of collection of addictions, whether that's gambling and food, or alcohol and smoking, or pornography and drugs, it doesn't matter what your 2 or 3 addictions are. One of the addictions will always be relationship addiction, which we used to call codependence, because all addictions grow out of fractured relationships. So, if you really wish to make sense out of the rest of the seminars and how to understand recovery and why it is important to achieve some kind of spiritually principled life, you have to remember that addiction is a pathological relationship with a mood-altering experience that has life-damaging consequences. And so, in conclusion, I'd like to say thank you to Terry Wood for inviting me to do this seminar series. He is the education coordinator for the Easy Does It Club in Surrey. So thank you very much for listening, and I'll get another video up in the next few days. Bye.